Hello and good evening. My name is John. Instead of playing a video game tonight, I'll be reading a book about a video game, The Horror of Hormak. I may be saying that wrong. I may say a lot of these words wrong. I have not played Dragon Age. I do not know Dragon Age lore, but I've got a very nice semi-early copy of Tevinter Knights from Dragon Age, written by some of my amazing coworkers, and I'm going to do my best to read it as well as possible. So let's get started. The Horror of Hormak by John Epler. The horses smelled it first. They were warden horses, raised around the fetid stench of darkspawn, trained from birth to tolerate their smell and to not spook as easily as most animals. They had stood strong in the face of charging ogres on more than one occasion. But mere hours after entering Navarian forest, the horses that Warden Ramesh's party rode on began to stamp and whinny uneasily, clearly frightened. Something here they don't like. Liesh looked warily. She was a Tevinter mage, confident to the point of cockiness, and not generally prone to fear. Don't tell me you don't feel it. Something's wrong. The whole place feels broken. He glanced at Ramesh and added, Besides, there's only two of us, not even a full expeditionary group. We should be waiting for reinforcements. Ramesh sighed and ran his hand through his hair. The hell of it was, he knew exactly what Liesh meant. The air was thick, almost suffocating. It pressed down on them, and there was an arid quality to it that burned his lungs, though he could not identify exactly what it was. And she was right about the rules, too. On a rescue mission, you always took more wardens than you had lost, ostensibly to carry out the living, but more practically so you could kill whatever the previous group had not managed to kill. Numbers helped on that front. But those rules had been written before Adamant, before Ostagar, when they still had numbers to keep patrols wherever they needed. Besides, Senior Warden Jorvis's group was now 8 days overdue. Unnecessary risks were not something Ramesh liked to take, but by the time reinforcements came, those 8 days would become 15, and another 10 to make their way back this far, and it'd be a month, at which point protocol was to treat them as dead. They could ill afford such losses. And the other reason, something unsaid, unfinished, between the two of them. Jorvis had meant everything to Ramesh once, but he pulled away. Death walked with every warden, and you learned to bury grief beneath duty. Easier to do that, it seemed, before grief's edge had been honed by love and friendship. But regret had a weight of its own, and he wished he had seen that sooner. He shook his head. We press on. We're a half-day's ride from where Jorva's mining expedition last reported from. Could be they're fine, Ramesh added. But until we get there, we won't know. And if they aren't fine, and we turn back now, that's that. Lisha inclined her head, accepting the gentle rebuke, but an expression of unease never left her face. Understood, sir. Just feels... something's wrong about these woods. It feels like the air hates me, wants me to die. She shook her head. I know, it doesn't make sense, but that's how I feel. I just don't like the look of this. Ramesh laid his gentle hand on her shoulder. Me neither, but we got a job to do. Misgivings will keep. He hesitated, then added, That said, one hand on your weapon, and an eye to the woods. They rode on in silence, and Liesh's expression of unease deepened, became grim. The air grew heavier, trees thicker, and the sound of the wind through the trees became muted, as if the outside world wanted no parts of these woods. 23 years Ramesh had been a warden. His calling was nearly upon him. And if he'd been alone, if only he had felt the palpable sense of dread that filled the woods, he might have thought it was that. It reached every warden differently, but Liesh had only been a warden for 2. If she could feel it, if she sensed what Ramesh did, it was something real. They'd gone another several miles down the muddy trail when, without warning, Liesh's horse reared violently, throwing her from her saddle and galloping madly back the direction they'd come from. Ramesh cursed and leapt from his horse. Liesh got to her feet shakingly and met the inquisitive expression with a nod. She was fine, then. He leapt back onto his own horse and wheeled it around to chase after Liesh's. Minutes passed. He rode hard, following the crushed underbrush that marked the horse's path, and from the crashing and snapping ahead of him, seemed to be gaining on it. His own horse reared suddenly, danced backwards a few steps, and Ramesh gripped the reins tightly, avoiding his tumble into the underbrush through sheer bloody-minded Pure bloody-mindedness. Patting the horse, he whispered to it, calming it. When he realized that the noise of movement ahead had completely stopped. Tugging gently on the reins, he turned his own animal back towards the path ahead and started forward. The noise came suddenly and filled the forest. It was a tremendously large sound and somewhat palpable, fleshy at the same time. There was a soft and liquid quality to the roar that set Goof's flesh crawling up Ramesh's entire body. It was a roar that marked clearly the delineation between predator and prey, and it was accompanied by a terrifying whinny that was cut off by a sickening crunch. There was another loud crash and a rustling noise. Then silence. A full minute passed before Ramesh was able to get his breathing under control, and another minute before his horse would even move. But slowly, inevitably, they pushed forward towards the source of whatever that horrendous exultation had been. Trees had been snapped, not sideways across the trunk as if by an axe, but vertically. Struck from below by some tremendous force, in the middle of the clearing, a massive mound of dirt had been displaced. Recently, too, judged by the dampness of the soil, while smaller disturbances were visible around the edges of the clearing. Of Liesh's horse, there was no sign. No evidence that it had left the clearing at all. The pattern of destruction had a clear edge, and beyond that edge, wood seemed undisturbed, the only evidence of any creatures passing being the trampled underbrush on the makeshift path that Ramesh and his own animal had followed into the clearing. There was something else, too. The by now too familiar scent of decaying foliage. Thickly sweet and pungent, certainly, but something else, too. Something sharper, saltier. It smelled like the sea on a stagnant day, the smell of brine and seaweed. Neither smell was unfamiliar to Ramesh, yet here, leagues away from the nearest ocean, there was a menace to it that troubled him. And what exactly had happened to Liesh's animal? The tableau in front of Ramesh suggested it had been dragged underground. Deep roads were nearer to the surface here than they were in most parts of Thedas, but the speed which the animal had been taken suggested something other than darkspawn. Tapping his own horse's flank with the boot, he spurred it forward, through the gap in the clearing he had entered and back to where left Liesh. He found her off the side of the trail in a small clearing, and she wasn't alone. A third figure laid in front of her, crumpled form in the blue and silver. A warden, one of Jobus's more than likely. Dismounting his horse, he sprinted forward. Liesh half turned to speak. She came stumbling out of the woods. She's raving mad. He looked back at the wounded warden. I'm doing what I can, but I'm not a healer. Something's wrong with her on the inside. More than just cuts or bleeding. Won't tell me what's wrong, though. Won't even look at me. What do you mean by raving? What exactly is she saying? Ramesh asked. Nothing that makes even a bit of sense. Here, for yourself, though. Ugh, that was a bad read. Here for yourself, though, Liesh said. Ramesh moved over to where the wounded warden was lying, her head propped up by one of Liesh's saddlebags. Her skin was a ghostly white, and her breathing was labored. A hole had been torn through her armor, and the stomach and a wound gaped. We didn't know. We didn't know. And now we do, she giggled, a high-pitched noise that sent a shiver down Ramesh's spine. Got to know, though. Oh, yes. We know better. They taught us, gave us a lesson. A coughing fit interrupted her, and she spat several times as to clear a foul taste out of her mouth. Ramesh gave Lesha an inquisitive look. She shook her head. Whatever toxin is in her system is one that must work its way out naturally. No response to my magic. I can make her comfortable, nothing more, she said. Ramesh crouched beside the injured warden and leaned forward. Warden recruit Fredel, is it? He nodded once, slowly, still refusing to meet his gaze. Senior Warden Ramesh, we're here looking for Jovis. You part of his group? He nodded, and this time faster. Good. Tell us what happened then. We went too far, too deep. Something's down there. Something bad. We thought it was darkspawns, but it's worse, because it's different, you see? Not the same at all. Not twisted, but made, created. 3 died. They were lucky. I wasn't. Escaped, but not really. He met Ramesh's gaze, and the Ramesh recoiled in horror. Her eyes were gone, clawed out. Besides him, he was dimly aware of the sound of Lesh retching in the bushes. Fredel began to weep, tears streaming forth from the empty sockets. Don't make me go back. Not there. Not where they are. I will not. I cannot. We must leave. This place to her. To them. He began to hit the ground, sobs turning into screams that grew louder and louder. They built it for her. They wait for her. I am free. I paid the price. He started to scream once more. Then came shrieks of pure terror intermixed with a laughter that contained not even a trace of humor. The screams grew until the volume was painful. The suddenness that caught Ramesh off guard, She leapt forward, knocking him to the ground and running past him into the woods. She nearly made it out of the clearing into the trees when blue light streaming from Alicia's hands surrounded the warden, enveloping her. She made it another dozen steps before staggering to her knees, then collapsed to the ground, blessingly silent. Sleep magic. Should have done that sooner. Leisha paused and then added quietly. The small mercy, the one I can give. What do you think it is? Ramesh asked, massaging his wrists. They were purpling and bruised. Tomorrow they would hurt more. Fear. Whatever she has seen, it has broken her, poisoned her mind. Leisha looked at Ramesh. We can't take her with us. If we do, it'll break her beyond all repair. Right now, she gave a helpless shrug, she will live, and with time, her mind may heal. But if we take her back to where Jovis she corrected herself hastily, we may as well strike her down ourselves. Leaving her is not an option. We must press forward. But if we leave her like this, food or no food, she'll die. Leisha began to interrupt, and Ramesh held up a hand. A day, maybe two. By then, maybe, we can leave her with supplies while we venture on. Looked her into the eyes. Any questions? There were none. They worked quickly, building a makeshift litter out of several fallen branches and canvas of a spare bedroll that Ramesh's horse still carried. Placing Fredel on the litter, they tied her to it with several ropes. It was not a step he was relishing taking, but the way her eyes had been torn out suggested to him that she'd done the deed herself. Who was to say what else she would do if her hands remained free? They pinched their tents, working quietly and competently. Ramesh set his own small one across the clearing from Leisha, an extra tent, normally meant for keeping supplies dry. He'd given his other tent to her to replace the one that had been lost with her horse. Warden and Fredel litter they set under the canopy of a large tree, tying the remaining horse to a tree on the opposite side of the clearing. They built a small campfire and lit the fire with flint and steel. Unspoken agreement had Leisha saving her energy in case it was needed. They ate, and then Ramesh had first shift on guard. Midway through his shift, a sharp inhalation of air and a slight rustle of cloth told him that Fredel had awoken. He looked across the clearing at her, waiting for her to move, but she remained silent, nearly still, showing no signs of her previous expression. Then she began to whisper something to herself, over and over. A nearly silent litany. Ramesh came closer, trying to hear what he was saying. But his presence quieted her, and he turned to his seat. A few minutes passed, and the litany started up again, nearly silent, unsettling. The next several hours passed unremarkable, and soon it was time for the change of the guard. Stretching, her hair tied up behind her with a leather strap, Leisha came out from her tent and exchanged nods with Ramesh. He gestured vaguely in the direction of the injured warden. He's awake. Not doing much, though. Ramesh stood up, and fatigue flooded his limbs. It's been a full day since he slept, riding hard towards where Jovis had disappeared. Wake me up if there's anything interesting happens. Leisha nodded, and Ramesh vanished into his own tent, closing the flap. He did not fall asleep, not immediately. Instead, from his boot he pulled a piece of parchment, tied with a long wax string. A message from Jovis. 15 years passed, telling him to wait. That they would find each other again. That duty, that sacrifice, could mean a whole lot of things. Ramesh had been too proud, too foolish to acknowledge what that time had meant to him. 23 years was a long time. Long enough to gather many regrets. But few had the same bitter taste to Ramesh as that one. He stared at the paper, reading the note again, and again, and again. A mantra across the decade. He hadn't said what he should have said then. This was another chance, though it wasn't already too late. Holding up the paper, he placed it back in his boot carefully and pulled his blankets around him. Sleep took longer to come than he wanted, but it finally did. In his dreams, Jovis, as he had been nearly 15 years, In his dream, Jovis, as he had been nearly 15 years ago, was walking away down the path through the thick Navarian woods, but no matter how fast Ramesh ran, no matter how quickly he covered the distance between them, Jovis was always just out of reach. Finally, he caught up with him, and grabbing his shoulder, turned him around. His eyes were gone, clawed out, and a sickening grin split his face. He reached towards Ramesh, towards his eyes, and pain erupted. Ramesh screamed. Sound came again, this time from right outside his tent. He leapt upright, his blade in his hand before he had properly and fully awoken. The scream came again, quieter, and somehow wetter, and then tapered off. The sound of horses whinnying in panic, in terror, replaced it. and then a snapping sound and quickly receding hoofbeats. Nothing moved. The remains of the previous evening's campfire, a few embers still glowing faintly, sat in the middle of the clearing. Alicia's tent was still there, intact, and the litter that had carried Warden Recruit Friedel? The restraints were torn. No, not torn. Chewed through. A thin grayish fluid traced a path through the underbrush towards the edge of the clearing, followed it into the bushes, away from the camp. And there, a dozen steps into the tree, lay the crumbled remains of Warden Friedel. She chewed through more than her restraints. Her wrists were torn open, tendons and arteries gone, like a wild animal had savaged her, but no blood around her mouth told the truth of the story. Whatever had happened to her, whatever she'd seen with Jovis, it had done its work. Liesh had been half right. Frigil had been broken. Something else. Her mouth. Mixture with the blood, a trickle of something else. That same thin, grayish fluid that traced her path from the litter. The reek of brine, of the ocean, was stronger, more present. He cast around the clearing, finding what he was looking for, a small branch. Whispering an apology, he forced it between her teeth and pried her mouth open. The gray fluid came out in a rush. Gallons and gallons of it spilled forth into the clearing. He leapt back. It seemed to come for minutes, far longer and far more than should have ever been inside a person. Finally, the flow abated, the stench of the ocean overpowering. Throwing the branch to the ground in disgust, he took several steps back, making sure not to step in the grayish flua. Fluvia? I do not know what that word is, and looked around. There was no sign of the horses. The trees that they had been hitched to, sturdy saplings, had been snapped in half, and the crushed underbrush told the rest of the story. They'd escaped then, and with them went most of their supplies. Alicia came sprinting out of the woods, staff aglow and ready to use. Saw Ramesh came over, and her eyes widened. She ran off several feet and proceeded to throw up. Ramesh did not blame her. He had to fight back his own nausea. She returned, wiping her mouth with the sleeve of her robe. She forced herself to look down at the remains of Friedel, swallowing again, making an effort not to lose her meal a second time. Ramesh turned to her. Report, Acolyte. Words came out more forcefully than he had intended, but he didn't bother correcting his tone. She spoke, eyes still fastened to the litter. I went to fetch more wood for the fire, but she was alive, still here, when I left. She looked at Ramesh and made no effort to conceal her fear in her eyes. What's going on? Tell you when I know, Acolyte. The sky had already started to lighten up on the cusp of dawn. He looked around the ruined camp, a few supplies they had taken from their horses, and felt a stab of despair. The rest of their rations were on his horse. Naker only knew where it had run off. Between the two of them, they had 2, maybe 3 days worth of food, and it was another half day to where Jovis had disappeared. Not to mention water. Their skins held enough for 2 full days, a little more if they carefully rationed it. Ramesh had no desire to drink from any of the brackish streams they've seen. Build a pyre. Let's at least give her a proper end. She was one of us. Died in the line of duty. But what was duty then? Something she'd seen? Something that happened to her? And he blinked away sudden tears? Something that could have happened to Jovis? Almost certainly he had happened to him. Almost certainly had happened to him. No, he would not let despair win. Would not believe all that was already lost. He dashed back the back of his hand across his eyes, wiping them. Waved off Liesh's concerned look. These 4 days back to town. Could look for our animals, sure, find our rations, but we could never find them. And then we worse off. More than we are now. I mean, Jovis was fully supplied, enough for a party of 3 times the size of it. We're likely to find something there. He shook his head. I don't like this, but I don't see another option. Isha nodded at that. There really was no other option than to press forward, deeper into the unknown. No more banter, no more words. They walked down the path towards the mine, each in their own private world, with only their thoughts for company. The silence was thick, oppressive, broken only by the muted sound of their boots on the muddy ground, moved with purpose. Isha lagging slightly behind, Ramesh ready to act if necessary. The ground became rockier, harder, and the trees began to thin. The mountain that the path now led towards unerringly loomed in the distance, 3 asymmetrical peaks twisting around each other. Yet still, the oppressive feeling, the smell of decay, remained. This seemed to grow stronger as it left the forest, not weaker. And all over it, the faint hint of brine. The path began to rise again, moving upwards at a slow rate, towards those 3 spires of rock, and along the path they began to see the first signs of civilization, albeit none that were recent. Mushrooms grow on a broken wagon at the side of the road. Houses, their windows dark and gaping, spotted the wood on either side of the path. Even at one point, a village, long abandoned. They picked through the ruins of the latter but found nothing useful. Whatever supplies had been there were long gone, either with the people who had fled, or perhaps more likely claimed by those who had business there. There was one other thing that Ramesh noted, though he did not mention it to his companion. Large mounds of dirt, similar to the ones he seen upon the disappearance of Lesh's horse, were scattered throughout. He thought of telling Lisha about what he'd seen and heard. Yet, what truly was that? Disturbed dirt and a loud noise? He'd seen nothing else. Not even the remains of Lisha's horse. He told her... Anything he told her was conjecture and would only stir her already fertile imagination. Finally, the woods fell away altogether, and they found themselves at the crest of a ridge. Ahead of them loomed the mountains. 3 peaks surrounding each other in almost serpentine fashion. A single path led forward, destination obscured by the hills on either side of it. They followed the path then, and turned the corner to see a scene of destruction. At the base of the mountain slope, broken weapons of both Warden and Darksparred make littered the ground. Trampled tents, broken equipment told the rest of the story, as did the blood that covered everything. There'd been a fight here, a big one. Not a single Warden body. Darkspawn corpses, dozens of them. No evidence of any of Jorvis's party had been slain, yet the sheer amount of blood splashed everywhere suggested something grimmer. Darkspawn ichor was easily distinguishable, even after it had dried, but this was something different, which meant that it had come from the missing party. Where were they then? Besides him, Lisha's staff, never get that name right. Lisha's staff was in her hands, magical enemy thrumming, ready to be loosened. Ramesh had his own daggers out. Bodily reaction to the scene before him, and realized his own hands were sore from how tightly he was gripping the hilts. Took a deep breath, let it out. Once, twice, 3 times, forcing calm. Yes, things looked grim. There was, in fact, a lot of blood, and that rarely spoke to anything good. But there was no bones, which meant which would have been left if the remains had indeed had been eaten. There was still a chance that Jorvis and his wardens were alive. He turned to his companion, making a show of sheathing his daggers. We should split up, figure out what exactly happened here. Look for anything that seems, well, relevant. He shook his head and then added, looks grim, I know, but no bodies. That tells me they could be still alive. That means we're going to go after them. Let's make sure that there's a them to go after. Isha nodded, her expression stoic, and returned to the camp. He walked through the center of the carnage, looking for a sign for something to hold on to. Damn it, Jorvis, he whispered. Despite his reassuring words to Lisha, he feared the worst. That there was no bodies meant very little. Perhaps they'd been captured, or any number of 100 other things that meant they were dead, and that this whole adventure was pointless. Still, he searched. There were no campfires, no sign of cots or bedrolls. This was meant to be fortifications then, not a camp. There were some provisions, but no more than would last a single day. They expected a fight, and clearly gotten one. That they had been overwhelmed seemed obvious. The number of Darkspawn corpses was enormous. And not just Hurlocks, but Genlocks, Shrieks, even a couple of emissaries. There was something different about these Darkspawn. Their mutations that gave rise to their mindless hordes were far from consistent. Yet, here he saw variants unlike any previously known. Hurlocks with extra arms, Shrieks with powerful legs of a Genlock, and an emissary with a second head. Something strange. Normally he would have written it off as merely being another aspect of the Darkspawn physiology that was inexplicable, but combined with everything else, it was disturbing. Hey, over here! Nisha's voice rang out from the clearing, carrying a note of excitement. Ramesh ran over to find her standing in front of a large hole in the earth. Peering inside, saw stairs leading down, bloody blueprint, not of Darkspawn, but of men. Jorvis and his wardens. Flame of hope flickered once again in Ramesh's heart. The smell of brine was stronger here, more potent. Anything where else in the clearing, and it seemed to be coming from below. Besides him, Lisha muttered a word and her staff began to glow. She pushed it inside the entrance of the hole, giving light to the darkness within. The edge of the circle cast by Lisha's spell revealed a small staircase that descended into an antechamber, slightly larger than the clearing above, carved with a skill and delicacy that rivaled the works of that's a word? Osmamar? Or even Kal Sharak. At the other end of the chamber, a doorway and a second staircase beyond that which spiraled into the darkness. The entire space lit by the glow of lyrium, and above the entrance, written in dwarven runes, a single word. Hormak. Well, the title's called The Horror of Hormak, so yeah. They descended the spiral staircase. Minutes stretched on as farther and farther into the darkness. The smell of sewage grew stronger. No, I read that wrong. The smell of seawater grew even stronger. Finally, the staircase reached its end. Another door, larger, grander than before, sat open. They walked through, Leisha holding her magic light in front of them. The door opened to an enormous chamber, fallen into ruin, yet still no less grand for its current decay. It brought to Ramesh's mind the other dwarven thing, but none that he had seen were a dire shape as this one. It made sense. The fall of Hormak had come centuries before, consumed by the Darkspawn, yet it was oddly, unexpectedly quiet. Around the chamber, the old mixed with the new, the latter being the small tents and bedrolls, as well as other signs of recent habitation. There was blood, though less of it than above, and the utter destruction was lacking. Whatever had happened here had been smaller, the battle less pitched. Rusted shovels and picks leaned against the wall in two neat rows. Skeletons, several which had fallen to dust, were the remains of dwarven armor, the remains of a mining party or a deep roads expedition, then long dead. But the hall bore more recent signs of Jorvis wardens. Guard fires had been lit at either end of the chamber. He poked at the ashes of one. A few embers still smoldered. Threw a few branches on, blew on them until the fire was flickering once again. Preserved food stored in jars, set in neat piles next to the fires, along with several baskets full of bread and smoked meat. He reached down and picked up a loaf. The bread was hard, but showed no signs of mold, so the camp had been abandoned recently, not too recently. The only entrance seemed to be the door through which they'd come. Every other doorway was choked with debris, the largest opening wide enough to admit a moose. Wrong word. The largest opening wide enough to admit a mouse. Nothing larger. Unless they doubled back, returned above, there seemed to be no place for the wardens who have gone. Something drew his eye. A half dozen or so small drums, bearing an unknown dwarven mark, were piled at a comfortable distance from the fires. They seemed odd. Oh, they seemed old, perhaps as old as the dwarves, but they were in remarkably good condition. Leisha was kneeling in front of them. She looked up at Ramesh's approach, and he raised a questioning eyebrow. Lyrium charges. Dwarves use these to remove obstacles, open passageways. I've seen them before, though none of this make. She stood up, absentmindedly wiping her hands on her robe. Unfortunately, they're mostly useless without a fuse, unless you happen to blow yourself up with them. I've heard of them, never seen them. Not many surfacers have. They use them to open up some of the old tunnels in under Mithrathos. He stood up and gave him a faint smile. Makes a big boom. Why here, though? Ramesh asked, frowning. There's a reason we don't come to this part of the deep roads much. The whole place is unstable. Dumont really did a number on it. Don't know. Mining expeditions take them along just in case. Passages collapse, something's blocking your way. A lot easier than chipping through with a pickaxe. Must be careful, though. She looked around uneasily. Like you said, a place like this, not properly shored up, who knows what you'll get. Sounds a bit dangerous. Certainly I understand it's fairly common among the dwarves, though. They then add, good for sealing things up, just in case you want to make sure someone, or, well, something doesn't get out. She glanced around the room, looking for something. The missing fuses, for further clue to Jorvis' whereabouts. Her eyes widened. Look! Grabbing Ramesh's arm, she pointed forward into the darkness towards one of the massive stone pillars. Right there! Looks like markings of some sort. Fresh, too. See? No dust. Sure enough, several marks have been scratched into the pillar, and looked at the next pillar, too. And then to the left. The same set of 3 marks have been sloppily scratched in each pillar. Whoever had done this had been in a hurry. Besides him, Leisha shifted uneasily. Looks like a dwarven mining sign. Tells you who's been this way, when they're coming back. But I don't recognize the marks themselves. You wouldn't. They are marks of a warden. Well, some wardens, I mean. Senior ones. Freldon, specifically. Great way to keep from being abandoned in the deep roads. Look. See this? 3 marks. The first is the date. Looks like 3 days ago. That's when you leave. Second's how many of you there are. 6 marks. 6 marks means 6 wardens. Third, fell silent beside him. What does the third mean? Ramesh shook his head. There was no mistake the grief in his voice. That's when you expect to be back. Means that if you miss that day, they're supposed to send a search party. On his other side, Leisha reached out a gloved hand and traced the mark. So when did they plan to come back? That's the thing. They didn't plan to come back. This was a warning. They don't want us coming after them. Silence filled the cavern then, somehow more oppressive than before. The flicker of hope that Ramesh had felt was gone, buried under despair and a growing sense of unease. Finally, Leisha broke the quiet, her own voice tingled with a hint of terror. But we're still going after them, right? We're wardens. That's what we do. We're not just going to... Ramesh raised a hand, cutting off the argument. Don't need to convince me. I'm with you. Leave no one behind, right? There's the right thing to do and the wrong thing. Personally, I'm about the right thing. His head in the net, quietly. Remember the oath. Going down there and... Something itched in the back of his mind, and it took a moment for him to realize what it was. Darkspawn. Drew both daggers in a single practice motion. Company. They came from the darkness. 9 Darkspawn. Genlocks and Hurlocks, both. Led by an emissary. Yet where the entrance would normally have been marked by gibbering and jabbering, these were eerily silent. What's wrong with them? He asked. It took Ramesh a moment to realize what she meant. They were changed. Different. One Hurlock had half a tail of a scorpion, another Genlock, but with a longer, thinner skull, more avian. And then there was no more time for words. They attacked as one, charging forward. A blast of fire from Leisha's staff caught the closest Genlock full on, and its all-too-human face sent flying backwards, its head a charred ruin. Another Genlock came at Leisha, its head narrower, thinner, jaw elongated. She threw herself to the side, raising her staff in a two-headed defense posture. The creature's jaw struck the hilt, momentum shifting, and it went flying past her before it struck the wall in a sickening crunch. The mass of Darkspawn spread out, moving to separate and isolate the 2 wardens, with a level of cunning and guile unusual for their kind. 3 Hurlocks and emissary moved towards Ramesh, weapons out. With the speed and flexibility that belied his years, he ducked under the swing of a brutal sword. A fist followed the sword, but where Ramesh expected the first to be, was instead a serpent's head. It snapped at him, misting by inch, venom dripping from its fangs. Momentum carried him under the blow, and he rose, swinging both daggers at once, taking the Hurlock's head right off its shoulder. Tears spurted from the wound. Another Hurlock blade scythed in from the left. He caught the sword in his daggers, turned the weapon away and rolling. A blast of green energy flew over his head and burned a hole through the center of the creature. The last 2 Hurlocks moved towards Ramesh, weapons drawn. His feint towards the creature on the left, took up the bait and recoiled, while the rightmost Hurlock lunged forward. He'd been waiting for that and caught the blade on the hilt of his dagger before shifting his grip and diving one weapon through the Hurlock's chest. It slumped forward. Fire drew a burning line down the left side as the creature's blade caught the edge of his armor, drawing blood but nothing more. It swung. It swung again, and Ramesh parried the blow, smashing his armored fist into its face, sending it reeling into a shower of broken teeth. He caught the bear's flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye and threw himself to the ground. A blast of fire moved through the space where his head had been only moments before. Ramesh rolled to his feet and turned towards the emissary. It rose above the ground, massive bat-like wings giving the agility uncommon of its kind. Keeping out of the reach of Ramesh's dagger, it fired magic blasts at him as they circled, dove at his head, swinging its long sword, using its longer reach to... Ramesh dodged once, twice. The exertion was beginning to wear on him. Suddenly he stumbled, and the emissary reach of victory, the only noise it made, lunged forward. Ramesh's mistake had been a ruse. He ducked under the blow, letting the creature momentum carry it right onto its 2 daggers. It impaled some of the weapon and slumped dead before falling to the ground. There was silence. The other Darkspawn were dead, dealt with by Leisha. Sitting on the rock beside him, gingerly wrapping a bandage around her torso. She saw Ramesh took a look of concern and shook her head. Got a little cocky. Thought I had the first one off balance. Misjudged and it got a piece of me. Oh, and it had a scorpion tail. Didn't seem to have any venom in it. Lucky break. She gingerly touched the wound and winced. Looks worse than it is. She looked at Ramesh. Why did it have a scorpion tail? And why did an emissary have wings? Could only shrug. I don't know. Never seen anything like that. This is something new. He just sighed and stood up. Unless they came from the surface, I can't think how they got in. There must be an exit, one we didn't see. He paused, deep in thought. Ramesh was carefully silent. Her eyes brightened. Of course, the warden sign. Limped to the nearest pillar. See? First one. And then it continued. She ran to the second pillar. Then the third. It's a path. He marked each pillar as they hit it. Ramesh heaved himself to his feet and followed after it. The markings continued for several hundred more meters before abruptly ending the last pillar half buried in the wall, but something was strange, different. Ramesh was the first to vocalize it. Notice this? The only place in the whole damn room that the floor is clear? Debris and refuse that cover the ground nearly everywhere? Else in the chamber, completely gone in front of the one section of Ramesh shook his head. A secret door. Damned. Found. How does it open? Leisha shrugged. I imagine it opens the same way any other door. She pointed at the bottom of the sectional wall. There, almost imperceivable, were a series of grooves, handholds, barely visible. Ramesh gave Leisha an approving glance and smiled faintly. Some of her unusual bravado restored. Let's see where it goes, Ramesh said. The shrill screech of stone grinding on stone filled the room as Ramesh hooked his fingers into the grooves in the giant slab and heaved upward with all his might. He resisted and then slowly moved, sliding within rock above this into some hidden alcove. With a grunt of effort, Leisha rolled a large boulder forward. Alright, back up. He did, and he released the door. He leapt backward, safely off from the door's massive weight. It started to slide back down before encountering the resistance of the boulder. There was a moment of uncertainty where the doorway gouged a small groove in the top of the stone, but finally it stopped him. Warm air trickled out of the passageway, the stench of brine and decay now overpowering. Several steps in, the passageway sloped downward and seemed to curve gently inward, forming a spiral ramp that led even deeper into the darkness. Ramesh took a deep breath, the air stinging his lungs. Beside him, the wood of Leisha's staff creaked as she tightened her grip until her knuckles were white. I assume this is where Jorvis and his team went. Makes sense to go this way. No time like the present, right? The confidence in her words was absent in her tone. Ramesh nodded, though his every instinct warned against venturing down the passage. Anyone still alive? They'll be this way. Count out 8 hours. If we don't find them by then, we'll come back, all right? Ramesh said, noting the strain on his own voice. He nodded. Taking deep breaths, like swimmers about to plunge into a frozen lake, they started down the winding passageway, deeper into the darkness, deeper into the bowels of the earth. They continued in silence for what seemed like hours, neither wanting to give voice to their fears, and soon the lack of conversation felt like a necessity. The idea of their words echoing down the seemingly endless tunnel and awakening something gnawed at them. The slope of the ground started to abate, then, and the walls began to take on more sculpted appearance. Blank rock gave way to carvings, mostly too worn and damaged to make out. Leisha paused in front of one image that had largely survived. It was a simple painting of 3 figures, a supplicant, a princess, and a monster. Leisha was the first to break the silence. It reminds me of something. What exactly? She shook her head. Almost like Avar cave paintings, but dwarven maybe? Ramesh leaned in and squinted. They look even more elvish to me. At least the people in the picture do, I mean. It's not about the picture. Look, every culture has their own artistic signature, something that makes it theirs. Tevinter is all about sharp angles. Ferelden is hard and brutish, and Orleas is delicate and opulent. Dwarves are, well, symbol's the wrong word. They get right to the truth. If it's dwarven, what's it say? Not sure, but look, the same image repeated with slight variations. She pointed to another painting that was partially intact. 3 figures: the supplicant, the queen, and the monster. Except the person and the monster change. Not a lot, but little, enough to tell. The princess remains. She was right. The creature changed a bit each time, as did the figure. The princess remained the same, or at least almost the same. It was perhaps the oppressive nature of the place acting upon his worst fears, but it seemed to him that the princess' smile grew a little wider and a little crueler with each sequential image. His every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to abandon Jovis and his wardens to whatever fate they had found. Training, his oath, even they told him it was too late to turn back. There was nothing that could be done for his comrades. I don't like this place. It's just wrong. That's the only word I can think of. Liesha's voice still carried that note of fear, but sharper now, more distinct. It was sentiment that Ramesh sympathized with deeply. Something more than duty drew Ramesh forward. Words unspoken. Something greater than a simple oath. The wardens were his family, and Jorvis could again be something more. He could no more turn back than he could tear off his own arm. He did abandon Jorvis. He made that cold and simple calculation. What returned to the surface would no longer be Ramesh. You should go. Get out of here. Only one of us needs to risk their life. He started back down the corridor before doubt and fear could change. He'd only gone a few steps when Leisha caught up with him. He gave her a look, still parts of gratitude and concern. He smiled tightly in response. They continued down the passageway. Around them, the walls grew smoother, larger. Delicate carvings started to appear, then flowers and creatures that Ramesh did not recognize. Finally, the hallway came to an end. In front of them, two massive stone doors hung partway open. They stood here a long minute. There was something menacing about the doors. Unbidden. Thoughts turned to crocodiles, jaws hanging open, waiting for their lunch to come to them. It was yet another minute before he screwed up courage enough to proceed. Moving together, they walked slowly, deliberately through the open. The scale of the room was vast. In the darkness, he could not tell where the room ended, but judging from the echoes, it was. Beside him, Leisha let out a low whistle, fear temporarily forgotten, chased away by the scene before her. What details he could make out. In the glow of Alicia's staff were incredible. Carvings of fineness and beauty that transcended any he had ever seen covered every surface of the cave. As a warden, he had seen much of the deep roads, as any. The greatest works of the dwarves, buried for centuries in ruined fangs behind seamless endless waves of darkspawn. This was something different, something more. There was no question in his mind that these ruins were elven in nature. While dwarven architecture remained the rule in the deep roads, there were exceptions from time to time. Wardens would find unmistakably elven architecture scattered amongst the dwarven works. This, however, was exclusively, entirely elven. There were no dwarven works pierced throughout, not even a sign of any darkspawn that filled so much of the underground, and this chamber was nearly pristine. The usual signs of age, of water dripping from above or pooling from below, were absent. Debris was scattered on the ground in places, broken vessels and shattered chests. The room itself was intact. Fluted columns receded into the darkness above, carved in patterns that seemed to shift, depending on how you looked at them. Their surface smooth to Ramesh's touch, speaking to the quality of the work, finesse carvings. On the surface of the wall were carved massive bas reliefs, running three parallel bands and disappearing into the darkness in each direction. The detail was exquisite, and Ramesh quickly recognized what he had first thought to be some kind of paint or pigment was, in fact, millions of tiny gemstones set into stone. The image engraved in the stones seemed almost alive, each one a perfect frozen moment as the actors within marched through their stories. On the topmost band stately elven kings and queens held court, their people kneeling before them in respectful supplication. On the middle, scenes of healing and succor, of disease and injury, being drawn forth from the sick, dying elven mages. And on the bottom, RLs, far more elegant and grandiose than any that Ramesh had ever seen, pulled by armies of Halal for its distant mountains, one of which he realized was a start. The same mountain with a start. It was the same mountain they were now beneath. The three jagged peaks that twisted around each other, easily distinguishable in every deep carving. Was, taken as a whole, magnificent. Yet, the more he stared at it, the more disquieting it became. There was something slightly off, something that set his teeth on edge, palms itching for the comforting feel of his weapons. Not one specific thing, but a preponderance of little things all adding up to an aura of quiet, deliberate. The striations on the columns, random at first, began to form patterns before Ramesh's eyes. Same symbol, the horns of a hala, repeated on each column. The symbols seemed to shift, changing in an inexplicable way that made Ramesh's eyes water. He tore them away, focusing instead on the bas relief that ran around the chamber. Yet even then, suddenly, wrong. Lowest band of the carving, the hollow point arrow was off. The hollow were different, wrong. They had too many horns for one, and a harder, more rounded look than was normal. A look that was almost insectile. Horns themselves were longer and rigid, organic somehow. Yet arrows were unlike any he had seen. Windows were barred, and they bore more resemblance to a prison ship than anything else. The middle band, with its scene of healing, seems now twisted wrong. No longer did it seem as if the mages were drawing corruption out of the wounded, but instead they were forcing it in, pushing it through and into the fallen bodies. The expression on the face of the elven rulers betrayed a contempt that was almost palpable. The beatific smiles edged with a disgust and disdain for the creatures at their feet, and the subjects, far from kneeling in reverence as Ramesh's first thought, seemed more cowering in terror. Fuck. Single word, Leash exchanged with a glance with Ramesh. Shook her head. She had seen it too then. The urge to turn back, to return the surf, was even stronger in this room, but a strangely rhythmic hum was growing louder and seemed coming from the other end of the cavernous space. One more room, then, and they'll leave. They moved quickly, purposely, through the massive chamber, the bas reliefs starting to repeat the same images as before. They paid them little mind, having already had their appetite for the strange art devoured. Finally, they reached the opposite end of the space. Massive doors, at least 100 feet wide, were set in the wall, but there, the side, the path showed signs of greater wear than anywhere else in the chamber. A smaller door, the size of a single person. Not wanting to spend any more time than absolutely needed in that cursed space, they moved quickly. The door had a single handle, elaborate carving worn smooth in place. The stench of decay, of brine, was almost overpowering here. Mesh swallowed. He had no illusions. Whatever waited from the other side of the door was not to be salvation. Isha gave a small smile, but it was forced. Ready? As I'll ever be. Holding each other's hands, they opened the door and stepped. Rank upon rank of twisted grotesqueries filled the cave. Each one was a twisted horror of body parts assembled as seemingly at random. The fanged maw of a serpent rested on top of a slender neck of a hala, moving rapidly on the limbs of a vartural. A massive spire scurried about. Its many eyes were placed instead with the heads of a dozen serpents, each one dripping venom from exposed fangs. In the center, a massive pool, filled with viscous gray fluid. Scent of brine wafted forth from it. Above it, a massive lyrum crystal hung, suspended. It glowed with a sickly light, tinged with yellow and green. Streamers of energy flowed from it into the pool, sending it bubbling wherever it touched. Moving carefully, silently, they entered the room. They crept forward, as far as they could manage without being seen. When they reached the edge, they stopped, taking shelter behind a large boulder made of smooth onyx. One of several that lined the upper part of the chamber, conspicuously in their uniformity and regularity. They watched as a Herlock walked towards the pool, stiff-legged. It broke the surface of the gray ichor, which reacted instantly, flowing around the creature. In moments, it was completely submerged. Out of the muck rose a cocoon, iridescent and pulsating, the green light. There was a hissing sound, a flash of light, and the cocoon shattered. Yet what came out was not a Herlock. It had the head of one. The head rested on the body of a massive drake. Maker's breath, whispered Ramesh. The entire room was a menagerie of horror, each creature worse than the last. This was an army, not Darkspawn, something worse. He signaled to Lisa. It was time to leave, to warn the wardens. He turned, moving with purpose towards the exit. But Lisa, her wound still not fully healed, stumbled, her staff slipping from her fingers, tried to brace herself. Her reaction was immediate. A cacophony of sound of voices rose. They could feel, more than hear, massive stampede behind them. Then a screech, louder and deeper than any, filled the chamber. It was more than a noise. A physical force issued from the throat, larger than you've ever seen. And then the stone they sheltered behind moved. It twitched, slid away. Boulder after boulder, each the same, slid past. As the creature's full length was revealed, it looked like nothing less than a massive centaur. Each segment was the size of a horse, each leg the size of a small tree. It shifted, faster than Ramesh would have thought possible. The chamber shook with its movement. It surrounded him and Lisha, cutting off their escape. Ramesh swung his daggers at one of the segments. A white substance splashed out and onto the stone, where it immediately began to bubble and hiss. The daggers themselves fared little better. The blade that had bitten the creature was fast melting, turning into a useless sled. The creature reared up, hundreds of legs twitching spasmodically in the air, and Ramesh gripped his sword tightly. Behind him, the hum of magic ready to release. Ramesh had no illusion. This was a foe beyond him, but he would make it pay a steep price for his life. It crashed down towards him as he braced himself for the impact, the crushing weight. But it never came. Instead, the creature jerked, spasming in mid-air and arched over the pair of warriors, smashing instead into the ground beside them. The lower half rock sending a series of small tremors through the cavern and bringing debris tumbling from the ceiling above. The creature twitched, thrashing side to side as if locked in battle, and then started to turn. It fought against itself, its movements staccato and uneven. The actions tinged with unwillingness. Finally, whatever internal conflict had been waging was resolved. It turned in earnest. The massive bulk shifted, the segments retreated, and the end of the creature, the head, or whatever seemed like one, descended. And with that came the greatest horror of the day. Where the creature's head should be, was instead a humanoid figure. He sat astrode the creature. No, not astride it. Ramesh realized the revulsion. The figure was part of it. The chitinous exterior flowed into the flesh. The lines between them blurred. His body, as fused with monstrosity, became. And the face. Ramesh knew then, pouring clarity, what had happened. The man he had risked everything to find. What Frel's warning had meant. Why she killed herself rather than come back to this grotesque place. Before him, twisted and broken, was Warden Jovis. It was him from the waist up, but bloated, grotesque, and his flesh flowed into the massive creature. His eyes stared blankly, unseeing, the mouth too wide and lipless, stretched and moved uneasily, as if only now remembering human speech. Ramesh. Voice came slowly, as if great gulf of memory and possessed of an almost insectile buzz that tore at Ramesh's tattered nerves. Head turned slightly, and the eyes shifted, staring at Ramesh through him. They focused, and in them Ramesh recognized his friend. Tears came to his own eyes, unbidden, blurring his vision. Ramesh made no attempt to wipe them away. The memory of his past, of better times spent leagues away from this place, broken nightmare, pressed down on him. A weight of regret and unspoken feelings. Ramesh blanched but stood firm, meeting the monstrosity's gaze. He blinked slowly. Behind him, Ramesh heard Leech swallow. Is it Warden Ramesh, yes? The voice was clearer now, more human. Yes, Jovis. Yes, it's me. Maker, what did they do to you? The Jovis thing shifted its bulk, turning so its entire body now faced Ramesh. We drank. Worked differently for us. Can't just touch it. We need it inside. Takes a while. Turned us. 2 halves, 2 wholes. Trying to be 2 ones. But I stayed, and it hates me. It twitched. The cavern now shaked sympathetically. Shaked in sympathy. Not forever. Not for long. Just for now. Enough. The buzz returned to its voice, insistent. And we waited for you. Oh, yes, now you come. The creature screamed, and Jova's voice came back. Can't let this out. Got to bury it. Bury me. The words came even more slowly, each one being forced through whatever will battered Jovis for control of the creature. He cannot have it. Not again. Locked for a reason. Who, Jovis? Who can't have it? The creature made a gurgling noise, and it took Ramesh a moment to realize that it was laughing. Damn, Ramesh. Always the wrong question. A shudder rippled through the monstrous bulk as the insectile buzz was back in Jovis. Delirium. Blow it up. Take this place down. Collapse the entrance. Started to twitch again. Next words were muffled. Stop me. Stop us. Jova's face twisted in pain and surprise as he slumped forward. Ramesh started forward, his remaining weapon gripped firmly. He could do one thing at least. End Jovis' suffering. Just as he reached the warden's body, however, the eyes snapped open, now black and devoid of any humanity. The creature grinned, an expression alien and horrifying in Jovis, before letting out an ear-splitting screech and charged forward. The creature's massive bulk rushed towards Ramesh, too fast to dodge, and braced himself for the crushing force. There was a sizzle, a scream of excited surprise, a massive flash of light, blinding Ramesh momentarily. His vision clear, he saw the wall of green light between the monstrous instants. Leech's face was white with strain. Jovis, whatever his expression, whatever his essence, his spirit, that animated his face was gone, buried under that alien will that drove the beast as it pushed against the energy field. She tittered angrily, then reared and crashed down on once again, sending Leisha skidding back several steps, but the wall held. Go! She forced out through gritted teeth. Sweat beaded on her forehead and trickled down. Not without you, Acolyte. Ramesh grabbed one of the darkspawn weapons that littered the floor of the cavern and hefted. Good balance. Leisha shook her head and then said, Warn the wardens. Bury this blasphemy. I will buy you time. The creature redoubled its pressure on her shield. Staff began to smoke. Her nose bled, blood trickling out of both nostrils. The rest of the creatures in the chamber began to stir. One chimeric monstrosity, a bat with the tail of a scorpion, lunged past the shield, striking at Lisha. Ramesh cut it down out of the air, sending it limp body tumbling to the ground. Its acidic venom hissing noise as more creatures skittered around the edge of Lisha's shield, striking at Ramesh. The hurlock that they'd seen earlier breathed a jet of fire, singeing the edge of Ramesh's cloak and catching Lisha in the leg. She grunted in pain and dropped to her knees before her. The shield started to crack, and the sheer mass of the behemoth overwhelming her reserve energy, and it let out another shriek, this one of triumph. Despair crept over Alicia's feature and Ramesh's heart. This was it then, the end. She looked at the creature, tears in her eyes, and then past it, above it. That single lyrium crystal, as large as any she had seen. He saw then the shape of her plan, her desperation. He started to leap forward to stop her, but it was too late. The shield collapsed, the magic flew from her fingers, striking that one perfect crystal, and it exploded. The blast sent Ramesh flying, tumbling backwards. He slid across the stone ground before finally slamming into the wall, his breath knocked out of him. A scream of rage, of anger, issuing forth not just from one throat, but from 100. A loud crack of stone filled the cavern. From above, a shower of pebbles, rocks, and then boulders as the ceiling began to fracture. The rocks where the crystal had hung were starting to crack. The rock spider webbing an entire section broke free, stalactites tumbling down and striking the ground with a crunch. And then, the loudest crack of all, as the ceiling finally completely gave. Hundreds of tons of rock avalanched down, a deafening cacophony that stole away all other sound. Like a series of dominoes, the rocks continued to fall, stones showering down from unknown caverns above. Everything in the chamber had been buried by now. Still the rock fell, as earth itself sought to bury every trace of what lay beneath. The sound started to slacken, the deluge becoming a shower, a trickle, and then silence. Occasional echo of a pebble tumbling down the slope of a cave. Otherwise, silence. And in front of him, a wall of rock, taller than the chamber. Lisha had done it. Blinked back tears. In death, sacrifice. She filled her oath, and as well as any other warden before her. But Ramesh had not. He still lived. Minutes passed before he was able to stand, and was longer still before he could tear his eyes away from Lish's Karn? Propping himself up on the dark, spawned weapon he had taken, he started towards the answer, a single step at a time. Behind him, a clattering sound, a pebble, and then another, and then another. He turned. Slowly, impossibly, the stone was shifting. Rocks fell away, boulders, revealing the chitinous mass of the creature. The shower became an avalanche. The cacophony of falling rock filled the room, seeming to fill time itself. Slowly it rose, pulling itself from the rubble. Before long, it filled the chamber once more. The sound of chittering once again, then slowly, menacing. Then it turned slowly, menacingly towards him. The face of Jovis, what had once been Jovis, increased in a smile that was no way human. Ramesh ran. He ran through the elven ruins, up the colossal spire slope. Behind him, beside him. Always near came the chittering, the grinding sound of rock as the creature bore its way towards him. Even when his breath grew short, even when fatigue threatened to steal his legs from him, he pressed on. Finally he emerged, sweating and panting, into the deep roads themselves. For a moment, Ramesh forgot where he was. Black panic threatened to steal over him then, but he fought it down, fought it back. There, the remains of the fire he'd lit when he first entered the deep roads, what felt like weeks ago. Aware that it had only been minutes, perhaps less, where the hideous creature pulled its way into the light, he ran towards the Cascalarian. Two at a time he rolled them towards the massive door, until all dozen of them stood clumsily in a pile. He remembered what Liesh said about the fuses, pulled the note from Jovis out of his boot, took a string that wrapped it. It would do. Took a stick near the fire, wrapped it in cloth, and lit it. Waited. From the depths, the creature broke free, stone flying upwards in gouts of earth. Segments after segments poured through the hole until it was finally free. It reared, its massive bulk scraping the top of the tunnel, and looked around angrily in the chamber. It spotted Ramesh then and shrieked, an almost human note of triumph in the animalistic noise. It charged towards him, covering the ground in an impossibly short time. He had one chance, and only one chance. Stood ground, waiting. Now. Lighting the fuse, the cask, he rolled out of the way of the creature's charge, close enough to hear its chitinous rasp against the fabric of his own cloak, and threw the cask behind him. The monster tried to change its course, but it couldn't, its own weight and size working against it. It slammed into the wall with titanic force, the impact shaking the cave, nearly sending Ramesh flying. It shrieked again, this time in rage, and he could hear the clattering of 100 insectile feet as it tried to right itself. He ran up the spiral staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. Through the antechamber he went, nearly losing his footing, correcting and leaping into the air, leaping to the first stair, to the third. He only that one again. He ran up the spiral staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. Through the antechamber he went, nearly losing his footing, correcting and leaping to the first stair, to the third. He only hoped the judged the time properly, that he hadn't cut the fuse too short or left it too. The earth moved. A wall of sound, like the fist of an angry titan, lifted Ramesh, throwing him out of the entrance to the deep roads and tumbling him down the side of a hill. The screech of the creature turned from rage to pain to despair as it weakened in volume before cutting off entirely. Behind him the earth shifted, the hill collapsing downwards, burying the creature with not just the roof but the cave and the entire mountain. Struggling to his feet, Ramesh stumbled down the mountain. Behind him it continued to implode, falling in on itself and wiping away the blasphemous place. Every moment he expected to hear that scream, that insectile buzz, but it never came. Silence replaced the thunder of falling rock behind him. Thunder came again, but it was real thunder this time. Rain started to fall. Soft drizzle, water mixing with the tears that streamed freely down Ramesh's face. Tears of mourning, of grief. For Alicia, for Jorvis, for the rest of the wardens, whatever doom had taken them. But tears of relief too. He made it out. Survived. More important, he could tell the other wardens. Warn them about the horror. Warn them about what lurked beneath Hormak. And maybe, probably elsewhere as well. Because he remembered something about the bas relief that he had dismissed at the time, but what now loomed in his memory. The mountain he brought down, the one that buried the nightmare under the 1,000 tons of rock, was not the only one to which the rebels brought their prey. There had been, before the images, 11 others. What? Others. That was The Horror of Hormak by John Epp, part of the Dragon Age Tevinter Knights. Cheers.